Welcome back to the high-level forum. Please be reminded that we have Spanish and French translation. And if you have questions, please use our question function. And as before, our co-moderator, Sun Min, will be happy to feed these questions into our panel discussions. My name is Thomas, and I'm your moderator. We are coming now to the last panel of today, practicalities around achieving sustainable infrastructure. Sustainable infrastructure is a major issue. We heard this today. We heard about the importance. We heard about the support it actually got, that we do need better contracts for the developing countries. And we also listened to some very impressive examples and stories. However, we should not draw too bright a picture. The truth is, contracts and sustainable infrastructure are rarely discussed together yet. Connex stresses the importance, and therefore we like to open the forum, our last forum of today, for a more conceptual perspective on the issue of contracts and sustainability. Just to remind ourselves what we heard already today, infrastructure requires trillions of euros of investment, but it's not just concrete and steel, but the infrastructure must be human-centered and deliver a service for its citizens. What does transformation mean since it became a new buzzword? And who, after all, is driving the change? Is it the private sector or the public sector? What is the interaction between these both sectors, or are there third powers behind it? Have we learned anything from the pandemic about how infrastructure is used and also built? What is transformation really mean to you from the different perspective? I'm honored to welcome my guest now for this last talk here. The first one I'd like to welcome is Matthew Jordan Tank. He is the Director of Sustainable Infrastructure Policy and Project Preparation at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I don't know why these titles always have to be so long, but that's the bank he's actually working for. Matthew also leads the bank's sustainable infrastructure advisory activities dedicated to improve the quality of advice and efficiency of project preparation for both public-private partnerships and public sector-based projects. So he should be our man for typical challenges and coping strategies from a financial perspective. And did I mention that you're also active in various MDB, G20 and OECD working groups on global infrastructure support initiatives, so very broad horizon. So Matthew, we're really glad you're with us. Welcome to our panel. And I'm evenly glad to have Mike Evans here, because without people like him, no project would ever see the day of light. He's a civil engineer, the guys who actually build things if it comes to infrastructure. And he has substantial experience in transportation, infrastructure development, environmental protection, and leads the highway business for the Arup globally. And he has overseen a wide portfolio of transport projects, road projects in particular, from planning, feasibility, and road selection to detailed design and construction. And I guess at the end, you also were driven with a car over your own roads. More recently, Mike has become focusing on working with clients and advancing the circular economy. So as I said before, we want to look at it from a more conceptual view. And I don't know who like to start. Maybe we start with Matthew first, and then we go to our engineer. Is that okay with you, Matthew? Could you start? Are you there?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I am here. Hello.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew. Moving towards bankable projects, financing of infrastructure, how you're actually doing this? I mean, how do you decide which projects you actually think that they are bankable, that you finance them? And how do you make sure that the creation of infrastructure does actually get from planning to realization, from dreaming to delivery? How do you do this?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, let me first start off by saying what a pleasure it is for me to be with this event organized by Connex. It's a real pleasure for EBRD to be part of this conversation. Well, I think the first thing to say is that you need to really think deeply about your delivery mechanism. On the one hand, it starts with, of course, a concrete commitment by our clients. These start with governments who organize tenders, and we at the MDBs and EBRD included, we take a lot of pride in setting up very rigorous, transparent, competitive processes for our projects. The second thing is, of course, organizing the experts who come in, supervised by the MDBs, but more and more jointly supervised with our government clients, so that we can have projects that are well prepared, that they look at projects that ensure high standards. This is critical for us as well. But we do high standards in a way that is also efficiently delivered. It is a challenge to be able to prepare with the speed and efficiency that our clients need, because there is urgency to these projects, but also doing it with keeping those high standards. So I think it's all about organizing the work up front. We use framework consultants very often, who are very experienced in working in developing countries, emerging markets, and then we carry on through implementation. We have to do this not only for public sector projects, also for private sector as well. And there are a lot of learning that we've done on how to organize this. I think just in my opening statement, I would just say one other key factor is when we do this work, we have to make sure that there's a lot of knowledge transfer to our clients. It's no good simply flying people in and out and leaving very little left behind. We need to make sure that they learn by doing, and so that after 2 or 3 projects, they can actually do more and more of the work themselves at the local level. So that's our approach, and we do it over 100 projects a year, and we've been doing it for many years. So happy to share that with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. So if I understood that correctly, you're saying that there's 2 or 3 winning points, and that is actually first to work very closely with the government together, so that the tenders they actually write, they're very rigid and transparent, and that they actually know what they want to have, and then organizing the experts and having the project that are actually good prepared and efficiency, and at the same time speedy, as you put it. Yeah. Of course, I have many questions already in my mind, maybe for later, that how do you actually involve the local experts? Because you said, okay, it cannot be the solution that we always fly in expert and then they're out and then the knowledge leaves with their airplane. So how do you actually do this transfer? That may be one question for later, because we had that before in the session with Rosaline, who also stressed the importance of capacity building, that people actually get the expertise in the country themselves. But having said this so far, I would go to my other guest and asked him, Mike, about your experiences if it comes to practicalities. What is it what you like to share?
So equally with Matthew, delighted to be here to talk about how we actually make projects sustainable. And there's some excellent points in what Matthew said about making things realizable. So, you know, sustainability, we have a problem where we need to use less material to do what we need to do. So another way of saying that is we need to do more with less. So we need to design projects that do more for people and you consume less resources as we do that. Not only that, what we use to build the projects, when the projects are coming to be renewed or refurbished or at the end of their life, we need to be able to reuse that material, because we know we need to be circular. We have a resource crisis that we don't have enough material. We have a planetary crisis that we need to use less material. So that material must be reused. And it's really interesting to pick up on Matthew's point about capacity building, because if you think about your projects now are going to have to, you need to do them once, you need to do them well. We need to have the capacity to maintain those projects so that when we get to the reuse point, the people who are operating those assets are in a position to reuse the material. And that gets into the practical engineering of how we design in reusability and sustainability, how we think about more about get away from an engineer's point of view where we have our solution bias and we have a more people-centric way of designing. So maybe sometimes we don't need to build a big project. Maybe we can build smaller projects, give better solutions to people when we're designing. And actually, then that means we actually can do more projects to improve everything for people. So there's a number of themes there about thinking better at the early stages of design, and then thinking about how something is going to be used in its operating cycle. And then that gets you into thinking as designers and the people who plan and organize projects that we have to share with our supply chain and our value chain. So we have to create contracts that create the opportunity for our supply chain to provide resources in a sustainable way, but not actually add cost. And that's where the interesting complexity comes in from my point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. If I understand that correctly, you say, okay, we have to build more with less, of course, but that would mean, okay, if you have this kind of smart approach, saying, okay, we have to stop this, that development means always more from the same. Development needs to be rethought, and that might mean that we build smart infrastructure. That doesn't necessarily mean we have more streets and more airports and whatever, but something that actually delivers the function. I understand that. On the other hand, we're all well aware that capitalism has a different logic, because it actually lives from consuming more. So what kind of obstacles or differences and challenges you are facing if you come with your smart approach and then a company that says, oh, if we build more streets, we make more revenues, and that's what we actually want. We don't care for sustainability. Is that something that actually happens in real life?
I think in real life, we're beginning to think of that. So we are used to having contracts where we specify what we want. And we're getting better at having contracts where we ask for what the service we want. So the classic example that people use to say that is, rather than saying, I want to light an airport, you say, I want you, and then we wind up having to replace the light bulbs and the light fittings and the energy that's consumed. You say to the private sector, I want you to light the airport. And you can do it in the way that you want to, using the least possible resources. And that gives the client the value. So they're getting the lighting they want, costing less for less resources, and the private sector gets rewarded. So that's where it gets, and then you need to write contracts that give you that opportunity to reward the private sector whilst giving the public sector what the public sector wants, using the least possible resources. And that's where you give everybody a share of the value.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I have another guest, Irene, here, but I cannot hesitate to ask our banker, if the client likes his airport, does it make the airport a more bankable project?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm glad you brought up airports, because they are, in the context of Paris alignment, the MDBs have been tasked with essentially committing to 100% Paris-aligned investments. In EBRD's case, we've committed to this. We've committed to this from January of 2023. Now, with regard to the transport sector and types of projects that are up until now dependent on fossil fuel technologies, airplanes, roads, etc. We need to build these projects in a way that is future-proofed, that is looking towards the future of a standard that will bring in sustainable aviation fuels, etc. So it isn't simply good enough any longer to just build out the infrastructure and not think of the usage and its carbon intensity of that facility. So I think we're, we have a way of doing this. We need to push. Frankly, be proactive with the industry, be proactive with the standard setters in that industry, and have a pathway that makes airports, amongst others, something that has something that can be much lower carbon in the future. Give the industry time, but push as well, because frankly, I don't think we can afford to simply sit back and do nothing. I mean, these are the types of assets that really need an extra effort on standards and pushing. And I think we can, if we do it collectively, we can get there.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a short question with a short answer. Did this regulation came from the bank itself or from the government to you?
Well, I mean, if you think it's really driven by the Paris Agreement. I mean, that is what set these goals, and so we're responding to that. But we also have embedded this, as I said, in institutional commitments, and I think we need to follow through. There are very bright people working on these methodologies, and I think we'll get there. But we have to work with industry. We have to work with that pathway over the next 10 to 20 years to get there. But at the same time, emerging market, developing countries need to have improved infrastructure. Think about ports, airports, rail, road. We can't simply drop the ball on them. They need to have basic connectivity for their countries and for them to be able to participate in the global economy. So we need to do it in a way that is forward-looking, high standards, and I think we can get there if we keep concentrated on the goal.
Yeah, I really like to hear this, because that would mean that even the financial sector kind of acknowledge that if we want to make business not now but also in the future, sustainability and sustainable infrastructure is actually key. And so even for a bank, it is good to actually to contribute to this. I have now also Ireen Musonda as our guest here from Zambia. Ireen, we are glad you could make it. You are currently the Director of Public Investment Planning in the Ministry of Finance and National Planning of Zambia. And you have a broad sectoral experience, including in the banking industry, the manufacturing, brewing industry, interesting enough, and as a public sector economist. We are glad you're here, and please, from your point, if we talk about infrastructure and sustainability, what conceptual ideas or even experience with new concepts can help us to create the momentum to raise the importance of contracts? What would governments need to use negotiations support? Irene, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak to the practicalities of achieving sustainable infrastructure. I think for us to speak to achieving sustainable infrastructure, I think we need to understand where we are coming from and what are the issues that we are trying to address before we come to the contract and ensuring that we have sustainable infrastructure. Of course, there is an acknowledgement to say that infrastructure plays a very critical role in driving economic activities. Of course, it has overlapping benefits, which includes environmental, social, and economic. However, key issues that we look at, and having an experience in sitting in public-private partnership and now in the public investment, I think the key challenges that we are looking at before we even go to the practicalities are the fast-growing population and obsolete infrastructure networks that most countries are having, especially developing countries, which are leading to cost of doing business and reducing productivity and competition. And the other compounding issue is the limited resources, fiscal constraints. We know that Africa currently needs about $60 to $100 billion annually to finance infrastructure. And that is one of the key issues that we are looking at. Policy inconsistency is also impacting on the delivery of sustainable infrastructure. The other issue, I think it touches what Matthew's talked about, is the capacity issue, which should help us come up with develop investment-ready projects, pipeline projects with solid business case that will be able to throw to the private sector to invest in. And capacity, of course, as it relates to the project preparation, the initial project development, we should make our projects viable for financing, especially even in terms of negotiating contracts for these projects. As earlier mentioned in the earlier panel, where they're talking about, it's really important when you're looking at these negotiations, we need to have a win-win situation that is coming if you are dealing with PPPs, you need to ensure that the private sector gets their return and the public entity also gets the service that they require, which is very sustainable and will be able to see. And in terms of practicalities, what is it that we are looking at? I think as a country, we've been focusing on revisiting our approach in terms of delivering these sustainable infrastructure. And for us, we are looking at integrating system of putting, of course, looking at infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure that will support human and social development, the infrastructure that will take care of the environmental sustainability, and also taking care of having an environment that is very supportive, the policy, the governance environment that will help in terms of riding these sustainable infrastructure. And for us as a country, I think we've been very lucky that we've been working with GIZ to try and help us through building these capacity partnerships and building capacities within the institutions that are coming up with these projects. GIZ is one of the institutions that we've worked with, and international senior lawyers, I think they've been really on hand to help us come up with standard legal documents for public-private partnership for procurement. And that is the capacity that we really appreciated, and I think we really see ourselves moving forward, especially when we are sitting in the public investment sector. We've noticed that there are gaps in terms of these having contracts that are really giving us the win-win and win-win situation. And for the public, from the public side investment, we are really trying to see how do we tool the stakeholders. I think one of the things that we are looking at having a legal environment that is very clear and people will be able to follow it. And one of the issues that we are currently looking at as a country, we have a legal framework for public investment, we have a legal framework for PPP. One issue is to enhance these legal frameworks that are there. It's the development of regulations. How do the various stakeholders be able to understand and be able to develop these bankable and sustainable infrastructure projects? So these are some of the issues that we are looking at. I think it's the integration that we are focusing on in terms of the systems or the areas to ensure that the projects are people-centered, are social-centered, and they are supported by the policy environment that is both beneficial to the private sector and the public sector. I think that's what I can say for now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Irene, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. I have a few questions. Matthew talked about the importance of project preparation. And if I understood you correctly, that might be something that in your country you're lacking. So how do you actually cope with getting, or how do you actually want to get better project preparation if it is so important? That would be my first question.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think, as I earlier mentioned, that for us to get these projects right, we need to do it right at the very beginning. So project preparation for us at the initial stage is very critical. And this is where we are having challenges, where we see projects taking long in terms of implementation because they were not properly done. In some cases where we see projects not even proceeding, or where government has put in money and midway the projects are really stalled or they're abandoned. And for us, what is critical, project preparation is really important. I think what Matthew said, I think it's really important for us to tap on such opportunities to ensure that we have these projects that are viable and we'll be able to flag them, whether we're supposed to finance them using the budget, or we are using the blended financing, or we are using debt, or we are using PPPs. What is critical for us is having viable projects. And that's a capacity that we really need as a country to ensure that we sell those projects.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I have a question, I think, to all of you, maybe, this capacity building thing. We talked about this already with Roslyn and others today. What I took from this is that the people actually in the countries, they appreciate this learning by doing. And at the same time, they also appreciate that they have special courses and empowerment strategies so that they actually can build the capacity. So that when the external experts fly away, some of the knowledge and experience actually remains in the country. But I try to actually just to imagine how does that work? I mean, if you have a team of external experts coming in and then people in the country, or how is it? Are you building mixed teams so that everybody actually shares their experiences? Could you just put some light on for it? How do you actually do this capacity building while doing a project? Who wants to answer here?
Maybe I can come back in.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry?
You always.
Okay.
So we start with you, Matthew,
Okay.
and then maybe Mike, and then we go back to Irene. Yeah. Okay, Matthew.
Okay, great. Yes. Well, I listen. Based on several years of having established a project preparation facility inside of EBRD, and this was in response to the G20 about 7 or 8 years ago. They asked the MDBs to create, have more focus on project preparation, and rightly so, as we've been discussing. However, we prepared, 4 or 5 years of projects, about 20 PPPs in about 10 different countries. And the result of that, whilst very good for those projects, is that we have realized, and I have realized as the director of that facility, in order to scale on the one hand, and to create more lasting capacity at the local level, we actually need to create national, local project preparation facilities with the countries so that they are the owners of those facilities themselves. We need to decentralize, in other words. If EBRD can help over 5 years prepare 20 PPPs, what would happen if there were 30 countries in emerging markets, each of them created 20 or 30 projects in their countries? That would create hundreds of projects around the world, and you would build up that being done by local experts, finding them. They are out there. Places like Uzbekistan, they have a lot of actual capacity that we've realized over the last couple of years. So we've made a decision with the Uzbek government. We're creating a national facility. It will be staffed with Uzbek experts who have learned about infrastructure in their kind of diaspora around in Europe and the US, et cetera. They're coming back. We're attracting them to work in their country for their development. I think this is the way that really I'm convinced of this after several years of running a central, London-based PPF facility. We need to replicate that and do it at the local level. The way to sustain these over time is to get the private sector to reimburse those local facilities for the cost of the project preparation. So if each PPP cost, 1.5 million euros or dollars, which is about the cost of each one, you can ask the private sector winning bidder, the winning concessionaire, to reimburse the facility for that cost. And they add it on top of the very, very large capital investment they're making. And it's a small percentage. It's really 1 to 2% on top of the CapEx. This is a way to sustain it. This is the way to pay for the people who work in that facility. And I'm just convinced, based on some experience we're having prior, and I'll just say it quickly and stop. We did this in Greece a couple of years ago. Now, Greece is a pretty advanced country. It's in the EU. It has lots of experience. But I can tell you, they have 8 PPPs launched in 18 months, in less than 2 years, with their national facility, which we co-developed with them. And I know we can do something similar to that in other countries if we just structure this the right way, believe in the local capacity, build it up, train it, and learn by doing, and hand responsibility to them for their own project preparation and help guide them. That's a true partnership, and I think that's the future, frankly, of these kinds of MDB-led, MDB-supported PPP preparation efforts.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think everybody would agree from a conceptual perspective. However, then real people, when they are together, that might be a different case. Then, I don't know, I sometimes know experts who have difficulties that they actually want to train other people to get the same expertise for various reasons. So I would also interested be in actually your experiences with these kind of capacity building in teams, although I see all the benefits that you actually scale up with this snowball system and so on and so forth, that you get the regional knowledge and experience in it, that you empower the countries and the team. But what is the day-to-day experience of in the teams itself? Can anybody share some experience, Irene or whoever? Yeah, please.
On what Matthew has been saying about so project preparation. Matthew makes a really good point.
Oh, looks like we lost Mike. I can still see him, but I can't hear him. Is frozen. So maybe we go to Irene with the same question. What are your experiences in these mixed teams? And does it actually work? Do you have some good examples, or do you have also some typical challenges in these capacity building? And then in the meantime, we try to unfrozen Mike. Irene. Here.
Okay.
He is back.
Thank you very much. I think I totally agree with what Matthew is saying. And as you recall, earlier I mentioned that we need to revisit our approach of doing things. I think this is we need to leave the classroom kind of training, but to hands-on training. And the example that Matthew is giving to have local communities to effectively participate, it also brings in a sense of commitment from the locals, and of course the issues of sustainability comes in. And having these mixed teams, I think it plays a very big role in sustainability of building capacity within countries. I think I can give you an example, the way we worked with ISLP on the development of standard bidding documents. We worked with them. We started the initial drafting, and we kept on consulting with them. And at the end of it, we have remained with that capacity to sit back and also be able to redraft those standard bidding documents, because we worked hand in hand, and we are the people that really understand the environment in which we are sitting in. And the other people, the experts, are bringing in experience, but in terms of understanding the environment, the locals are well abreast to understand the situation in which they are working from, and they'll be able to apply that the experience that they have in the environment using the experience that is coming in. So for us, I think this working in teams, mixed teams, I think it's a plus for us, because I think the issues of sustainability will always be there, and we don't need to go back. Okay, we might need to ask one or two things, but with the experience that we have with this hands-on training, I think it's a very good way of going. And also it brings in commitment from the public entities or from the government.
Thank you very much. These mixed teams, I find a very convincing idea, because, as you said, the local people, they understand the environment, the experts, they bring the external knowledge, and then it all comes together, and ideally, everybody profits from everybody. But Irene, do you facilitate these kind of trainings, or do you leave the teams by themselves and then you cross fingers that they actually will work together well?
It also depends on what practicalities that you are working with. If it's a project, we work together. We start the project with the external expertise and ourselves so that we go through step by step. But there are those issues where as locals, we understand the environment. We initiate, for example, if I'll talk about the standard bidding documents, we initiate and look at our local legal environment. What is it that we require to put in there? Then we flag it off so that we have the best international best practices included in those documents, and also have these back and forth interaction with them with meetings. And we also give an opportunity for the expertise to ask questions to us. Here we've noted that you've said this, but in terms of international best practices, this is what it's saying. But how best do we ensure that this is taken care of? So there's this back and forth interaction between the expertise and ourselves. And in some cases, we will need the expertise to be around to understand our environment. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. From your perspective, I don't know if you're usually like the expert side. So how would it look from your side?
So as someone who works for the private sector or the public sector, I'm interested in Matthew's point about having procurements that are ready for the private sector to invest in, that are prepared to be sustainable. Because if you do that in the correct way, you allow the project to be a collaboration project that builds local capacity and provide a measurement that allows the private sector to say, I'm investing in a project that is sustainable. That is now a more resilient asset to invest in, because you know it's been future-proofed. And go back to the very good point that Matthew said, we need to provide the solutions now, but they need to be ready for the change that we need to do in the future. And if you put that into the project preparation, now you give the private sector something to invest in that is an attractive asset to invest in, because it is inherently future-proofed. And it's also, if you build a local capacity for the private sector, that is future-proofing it as well. So if we can join all of that conceptual thinking up into the project delivery, so that you have something that you can give to the private sector that becomes enhancing to invest in, we get this, and then you do it again. That's where we get into a virtuous circle.
Okay. Understood. Thank you very much for putting some light for me on this. I want to go back maybe with my almost last question to Irene. What more would you want from your perspective? If you could ideally get what you want, what would it be in regards to infrastructure and to negotiation support, Irene?
Thank you very much. For us, as I had mentioned earlier, project preparation is very cardinal for us to come up with the portfolio of ready investment ready project pipelines, and that is based on having properly prepared projects that are able to be tapped in by the private sector, even ourselves as government, so that we reduce excess spending, which is not effective. And the other thing is the contract negotiations. I think it's really critical for us, especially when you're dealing with the private sector. They may have well-informed and well-experienced teams. And when it comes to the government side of the public entity, we might lack one or two experiences or expertise in when you're negotiating. So negotiation skills for us are very, very critical if we have to get value for money from the project and be able to get the service delivered to the people, as well as ensuring that the private sector also gets their return from the project. So this building capacity partnership ourselves, I think, is very critical for us to provide sustainable capacity enhancement in project preparation and negotiations. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have one more question to Matthew, because we touched already on the issue of how does the public sector function, how does the private sector function, and I think they have different rationalities. Private sector usually has money and they want to make money, so it must actually at the end there must be some revenue. The public sector has different means of power, usually through regulations. So how would you actually see the interaction and dynamic between the public sector and the private sector? And is it that one actually drives the others, or actually they're kind of driving themselves as in a system? Matthew, how would you see this relationship?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, this is a critical question when you're really talking about the practicalities of preparing a project. And by the way, this goes not just for emerging markets. This goes for all countries, all governments.
Yeah.
Obviously you need, you want something from the private sector, and you're going to define that in a tender, right? In a public tender. So you have to know what you want. You have to know, how to get it and translate that into those tender documents. I think, what we've learned, I guess, speaking from 20 plus years of working in MDBs, I mean, you want something that is an output specification. So what I mean by that is you tell them how you would functionally like this asset, this thing that they want to do to actually work and deliver, and the benefits. That is, defining the output, the actual results of what you want. That's a good way of doing this, but this is something that, there's a lot of experience out there. That's why it is very helpful to have experts on your side, if you haven't done this yourself, to bring them in and help you through this the first few times. But then you set that in your standards, and then you go forth. And I think, it's about getting the help up front early, and then learning from it, and then doing it going forward, hopefully more and more on your own. Because, I've worked 24 years first in Latin America for 10 years, and now 15 years with EBRD, and it's been a great pleasure. But I also really would like, by the time I'm done with my career, to have more and more countries, sort of objectively be able to do more on their own. I mean, you have to get to a point where they're building up enough of their own abilities so that you kind of put yourself out of work. I mean, I would love that to be the case, that there's many more countries that really can chart their own destiny and do it themselves. So that's what I'm working at.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was even thinking a little bit more conceptual, saying, okay, the public sector, for example, can decide as a source of energy, we only want from now on renewable energies. And that then actually gives as a framework to the private sector. And this kind of dynamic I was interested in. Do we have some experience here?
Is this back to me, Thomas?
Yeah, it's back to you. Yeah, it's back to you, the question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, really quickly, and I'm interested in others' responses. I mean, I think you mentioned renewables. No, indeed, that is an area where there has been more standardization of approaches. Think of solar and wind in particular. There's replication that is happening. We do advisory in that area, but frankly, there are enough similarities from country to country that you can standardize that approach, and there's so that helps a lot. And I think there it's about doing it a couple of times and then really make sure they adopt, as Irene said, standard bidding documents, standard offtake agreements, power purchase agreements, et cetera. So I think it's critically important. And by the way, let me say, even though we have very, very high standards and they're critical and we will keep them, we have to make sure the countries are able to make huge investments in renewable. That energy transition in solar, for example, has to quadruple between now and 2030 globally. And right now, we're struggling because of supply chains. We're struggling because of all kinds of issues. We need to keep ourselves focused on doubling, tripling, quadrupling solar investment in the world. It's incredibly important, as we all know.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Also, Mike, to this question of the relationship between public and private sectors.
I think that we just brought up the energy sector, and there's an interesting dynamic between that area of future-proofing. So we spoke about the need to We need much more renewables. We need the renewables faster. But also we need to manage the demand from the other sectors for that renewable energy. So if you take transport sector, people like me have a responsibility to curtail the amount of traveling happening, and that traveling is the most efficient it can be. So we need to design our transport systems with our cities that there's less travel, and that less travel will reduce the pressure on the energy sector and give it more time to put in place renewable energy. We mentioned already the population growth. So we've enormous growth in our cities, and if we don't do that growth properly, our transport system winds up consuming too much energy and puts more pressure on the renewable energy sector to do its transition faster. So that's this really complicated piece of system interdependency. And that's where thinking about project preparation, not just at individual projects, but as the programs of projects we do about building our cities, building our transport system, building our energy system, and building our water system, that's what gets really interesting. And if we can bring the innovation from the private sector into that, that's the sweet spot. So it becomes quite conceptual, but the reward is huge.
Yeah, okay, understood. But yeah, thank you, understood. I was just thinking while I was listening to you, Mike, that of course we can kind of make the existing infrastructure better and add here and add there. But I think you're also well aware that some countries, they'll say, okay, we are screwed with the infrastructure we have, we build it from scratch. We build new cities. We simply don't want to improve things. We have to build it from scratch. Can you share some of those ideas?
And it's in that situation where you get the opportunity to do it in a better way. So you can create your transport system with your city planning, with your energy system, and link it all up so that you actually build something that works much more efficiently, makes people's lives better, but's consuming less of everything, less energy, less resources to build the infrastructure. If you can come up with a way of using less resources to build the infrastructure, then you can actually build more, you can do more of what you want to do. And achieve your goals. So you know, that is the opportunity of leapfrogging. You look at what was done incorrectly, you avoid that, and you leapfrog in your technology. A second adopter always has that opportunity to leapfrog in terms of the outcome.
My last question, but I don't know if it's actually to the topic, but I would be interested. I mean, coming from the West, we have this what we call European city model that developed here over 2,000 years or even longer. It somehow was implemented also in all over the world. But can't we think of cities and infrastructure totally different, not only with this, or not always with this European-centered perspective? Must be a city something like a European city? If we talk about infrastructure.
So in my area, I'm quite interested in that. You can have your European city, your dense city, but that's not what all of our cities look like. Some of our cities in both the developed world, you know, so if you take an American city that's quite dispersed, how do we divide an infrastructure that works for that? How do we devise an infrastructure for a rural population that is still close to a city that works in a sustainable way? So you are right, not every city is going to be that dense, compact city. That will be an ideal, but we have to live in the real world, the practical world, and come up with avoiding the big, as I spoke about, solution bias. It doesn't have to be a big metro. Maybe it can be a bus-based system that works with what you have. And gives you a better output. A bus-based system that gives you practical measures now that avoids you having to build big infrastructure, more expensive infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the quick answer. My last thing goes then to all of you. I take Matthew's ideas and I understand perfectly why it is important to have standardized contracts, processes, and so on, because it makes you more efficient and you can take learnings from one country to another country. But at the same time, every country is different, every region is different. So is there a tension between regional approach and having regional teams and standardization of learnings from other countries and regions? That's my last question to the three of you. Irene, would you like to start? Then Mike can still think about it, and then we go to Matthew. Is that okay? Irene.
Okay. Thank you. I think for me, the combination of both will be ideal. Despite having different environments, to say this region has this environment, but the experiences and expertise differ. So the combination of both from different regions would give us a very formidable team that would create sustainable infrastructure based on the environment in which they want to implement that. So for me, I really don't see that disaggregation. Yes, as the other panelist has said, we cannot replicate what is in a certain city to come and put it in Zambia, for instance, maybe in New York, they will replicate it in Zambia. But we can pick a few things which we think will fit to the environment where we are, the region where we are, which we can use to effectively deliver what we want in terms of sustainable infrastructure. So for me, I don't think there should be that divide between regions, but there should be that partnership, building partnerships as we come up with sustainable infrastructure, regardless which region we are coming from. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Irene. I pass on this question to Matthew, and then we go to Mike as the last, and then we summarize. Matthew.
Okay. Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think obviously there are certain kinds of assets which are linked to global trade. You know, you think of ports, for example, or indeed sort of a capital city airport. I mean, there's certain standards, there's certain ways that the global aviation industry, the global shipping industry works. So they need a certain kind of way of doing business, so to speak. On the other hand, there are many other kinds of infrastructure, which are very, you know, you have to think sensitively about cultural norms, architectural norms, material usage, what makes sense for the climate locally, and so on. So I think in the built environment, you know, anything to do with buildings and the way urban development, regional development is organized. I mean, you have to think very hard about what it is that makes most sense, what fits with local customs, cultures, and so on. And I think it gets back to the way you prepare projects is very important. I didn't mention it, but I will right at the end. Deep stakeholder engagement, local planning, local understanding and inputs is incredibly important, and we're trying to do more and more of that, particularly in the way we plan our projects at the city levels with our city levels. So, you know, deep stakeholder engagement brings some of that out, hopefully, and I hope we're doing a good job of that now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, last but not least, how do you see this, Mike? This local and standardization approach?
So to build on the points that have just been made, we know we need to standardize so that we can do things rapidly, but actually you need to do it in its local context. I spoke at the start about designer bias. Our solutions won't work unless they are designed purposely for the people who are going to use those solutions. And those people, by definition, are local. So if you don't bring, as Matthew has alluded to, the local of how the people who are going to use the solution, whether it's a water solution or a transport solution or an energy solution, you don't design it for the people who are going to use it. It won't be used in its intended form. And it you need to come up with solutions that will be used by the whole of the population. So it is that standardized, but always customized for your local place. And that comes back to, if you're not including a local capacity of what you're doing, if you're not listening and you're not including, you're not really being sustainable. You can't describe the projects as being sustainable. They therefore aren't sustainable, and we're not doing what we said we were going to we intended to do.
Yeah, super. Thank you very much. I think we can take this as a closing word from you and all of you for this panel. Today, we're coming now to the end of our first day of the Connex Forum on Investment Contracts. And We started with highlighting the importance and relevance of contracts for achieving sustainable infrastructure and climate change, and focused then on the infrastructure as right now. We have heard from the field practical experience and solutions that actually works. We heard obstacles and challenges you're facing. And tomorrow we will focus on our second issue, climate change and the potential impact negotiation supports can have to achieve better contracts for a just transition, whatever just transition then mean. That in itself could be a forum. Again, we will have distinguished experts from different fields and then look at it from different angles and perspectives to add to what we try to get a comprehensive view on our issue. And for now, I'd like to thank all our panelists, especially my last panelist, because I haven't said that before. I really thank all our panelists and speakers for taking the time, sharing their knowledge and wisdom and experience with us. I'd like to also the people behind the scene, our production team under the guidance of Ute, Florian and Simon from Sendewerk, who made the streaming of the forum, and of course our translators. Without them, a lot of people would not have understood what we are saying. And all of you, of course, for your interest and active participation. We will start tomorrow at 1 p.m. Berlin time, CEST. And thank you. See you all tomorrow. And we'll have, again, outstanding experts and stimulating discussions. So please stay tuned. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.